Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Sarah Hutchins, partner at Parker Poe, and Judd Welle. He is also a partner at Goodwin, and we are here to discuss AI and data privacy legislation and governance, as well as the evolving cybersecurity threat and response environment. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome back to Trade Talks. Sarah, it feels as if we have a patchwork of legislation and regulation when it comes to data. Where are we right now as we head into 2025 as it stands?
That patchwork continues, as you noted. We saw a lot of new laws come on the books in 2024. I think over 40 bills were presented, and multiple laws have passed that'll become effective in 2025, and especially with the continued federal upheaval with respect to how our government is going to regulate privacy and security at the national federal level. I think we can continue to rely on the states to progress and create new focuses, either omnibus laws like we've seen in some states or niche focused, including on AI, as you mentioned. And that's going to continue in 2025.
Yeah, and that's what makes it challenging, Judd, because you have all of these jurisdictions that approach it in very different ways. And oh, by the way, the environment is dynamic. It's always evolving.
It absolutely is. It's one other layer of complexity. It's hard enough for organizations to innovate, to incorporate new technologies like emerging AI technologies, while also staying one step ahead of the threat actors who are constantly looking for ways to gain access to systems, to steal data, to extort. Then you have this uncertainty around the regulatory environment. I think at the end of the day, the advice to clients is to focus on your own maturity. There are steps you can be taking, responsible best practices, irrespective of what is a positive legal requirement to undertake. And so we've seen that, I think, across what the regulators are attempting to do here in this space. They just want to see that maturity. They want to see identification of risks, assessment of risks, and responsible investment to mitigate the risks.
Yeah, so it sounds as if data governance within the enterprise is the path that it's taking for the time being.
Right, and it's so hard sometimes to focus on that when there's new emergencies every day for businesses, but allocating the time and regular cadence to be meeting with your respective leadership heads across marketing, IT, HR, and demonstrating that compliance if and when, frankly, you're ever questioned by a regulator as to how you're focused on consumer privacy, employee privacy, data security to prevent disruption, and these new emerging tools is going to be key to avoid major compliance focus in the future.
But what makes you wonder who's responsible for this reporting? Does it fall on compliance? Does it fall on the information and tech side of the enterprise, or the risk management side?
Well, that's
right?
Usually a Monday morning quarterback question, because I think it really is going to fall on everyone. Certainly we're seeing from regulators a lot more focus on the C-suite. Was this properly being watched by the board, by the executive team, certainly by legal? So it's the responsibility of everyone. And we can see that across regulators. The Department of Justice just put out new compliance guidelines with respect to AI and the programs that companies put in place to get the benefit of a compliance consideration when dealing with a regulator. So it's really important to have it be a comprehensive, holistic approach across all aspects of a company.
Yeah, and Judd, of course, the bad actors are leveraging the same type of technologies as the good actors, and then there's also this rush to get product to market because the landscape's so competitive with technology evolving at rates that certainly legislation and regulations can't keep up with. Then you have to start thinking about critical infrastructure, mitigation and response, and doing that in a way where you're putting risk first before just trying to get new tech out to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to pick up on what Sarah was mentioning about, and your question about, well, who's this fall upon? One of the first things you do in good governance is to define the roles and responsibilities, but it has to be governed from the top. And I think we are also seeing companies, chief executives, members of the board, looking at this problem set not just from a defensive standpoint, like we're going to get sued or we're going to get investigated by the government, but it can be a differentiator. They're racing to build AI tools into their products. They want to maintain that competitive edge. They want to get ahead of their competitors. And if they do invest in secure design, secure governance, responsible practices, they're going to be able to provide, I think, more robust services over the longer term. So I think that investment thesis is there for them. As it relates to critical infrastructure, we are entering, I think, a very interesting time with global tensions on the rise, with a new administration. Remains to be seen what the Trump administration is going to do around cybersecurity in terms of priorities. I think it's safe to say that we will see some emphasis on securing critical infrastructure from nation-state threats, which outgoing FBI Director Christopher Wray just recently recognized as probably the leading threat that he sees on the landscape for the long term as he leaves his post at the FBI.
Yeah, and it typically hasn't been prescribed by law as it relates to cyber risk management, but to your point, this is a national security issue. I mean, think about it from, whether it's a healthcare or tech company, it's not even like you're thinking about proprietary design, it's the data that's the commodity these days.
It's the data that's the commodity, and also as companies build AI systems into their critical processes, there's a risk of disruption. AI systems are just another set of information system and processing. They're subject to the same conventional vulnerabilities and attacks that have caused disruption in other industries. It's just a wider attack surface. And in addition to widening the attack surface, there are also unique threats to AI systems that don't correspond to your typical run-of-the-mill information systems like file servers and things like that. So without making it all technical, there is going to be this arms race for talent, for people that understand the particular risks and are adept at coming together in a multifunctional way to address them, because it isn't just the domain of information security professionals or compliance folks. There really has to be this sort of array of professional perspectives, all orchestrated by senior leadership with appropriate investment to tackle this complex challenge.
Yeah, and Sarah, when we go back to thinking of data as a commodity, tell us about data brokers. How does that add another layer of complexity?
Well, I think companies are exploring right now the data that they've been collecting for years as a potential additional commodity to what their traditional line of business is. And with that, there's a lot of opportunity, but you have to take that opportunity with careful risk analysis, and especially the changing regulatory environment. So where you share your data and you get something in return, not necessarily just selling it straight up, but something, there may be requirements to register, there may be additional requirements that you have to take down your data. And to build on Judd's point, it's really important to know your tool. We're not just dealing with situations if you have a security incident or otherwise where you are looking at your file share and taking it down. If you don't understand how information gets into your AI tools, if you're a data broker, how you have received your data and are selling it, it makes it very difficult to respond to all of the stakeholders that you have to when you have a security incident. Not just the regulators, but your customers that you're potentially contracting with.
Right. So a security incident, what does that timeline on a high level look like? I've heard 72 hours, I've heard working with cyber coaches when you think about the response to it. Is it an all hands on deck moment? What does that look like?
Yeah, give up your weekend, give up your vacation, absolutely. It's a phased approach for sure. Your first couple weeks are all about identifying what happened, securing your environment, preserving evidence, that's really important, having your immediate notifications that need to be done, usually from a regulator perspective, it might be 72 hours. Or major contractual notification requirements that you may have that could be just as short. And then after that's established and you know what's happened and you know that you're secure, then it's sort of a review of the data that's at issue and what your obligations are with respect to that data. That process can take months. It's going to depend on how accessible it is. And if you have put it into a tool that you don't understand how it's been used and where it's being stored, that just complicates the process.
Yeah, and Jed, to your point earlier, I would imagine there's almost fire drill situations where you prep for it. And
Absolutely.
You practice for such a scenario. Cyber insurance is also becoming a part of the conversation as well, that perhaps companies did not include when they think about coverage, because it isn't necessarily covered by commercial insurance. It's a whole separate thing.
Oh, that's absolutely right. So the coverage landscape has changed quite a bit over the last 10 years. There are focused products that meet the challenges that companies face today with the modern cyber threats, whether it's cyber extortion, ransomware, things of that nature. It makes every bit of sense for every company to consider risk transfer, because essentially that's what we're doing here. We're identifying a risk, and rather than building up the defenses, we're choosing to insure ourselves. But there always does remain that opportunity to shift those resources to your own defenses. So most of our clients will take a hybrid approach to that, right? You can't forego investing in defenses, in response capabilities, in people process technology, but having the backstop of insurance is certainly the option that many of our clients take.
Is there a common thread with clients that you're working with, whether it's an incident that continuously happens, or you know, in terms of how they're thinking about mitigation or response? Are there any common threads that you're seeing?
I think the common thread is nobody is as ready as they hope they are.
Human error,
Yeah.
It's human error, and you know, there's a life cycle approach to these incidents. There's always learnings to be undertaken. So even the most mature, most prepared clients will find themselves behind the eight ball in some respect. You can predict certain things might befall you when it comes to cyber attacks. You can plan for them. We help companies plan for them, but nobody has a crystal ball in terms of how it will unfold. And I think a lot of that comes down to conceptually they feel prepared, but have they really tested some of the technical details, right? You think about, hey, well, we have backups. We back up our data. Well, how quickly can you restore from backups? Have you ever actually tested that, right? It's sort of like driving around with a spare tire, right? Well, it's comfortable to know it's there,
Just don't know how to change it.
But when you need it, do you know how to change it? And is there air in that spare tire? So that's sort of the layer that I think you know, they wake up. It's a rude awakening during an incident to realize that your level of preparation has to go all the way down to that level.
I just think because, Sarah, it's not necessarily an exact science like an actuary, as an example.
Sure.
There's different variables. The data is still being developed in terms of predictive technologies and so forth. It's not like you have a table in front of you. So we're learning as we go along, for the most part. And it's almost like electricity. You can't touch or feel data, or you wear a hard hat on a construction site so you don't get hurt. It's not quite as not transparent, but it's not quite as obvious when you're working with these emerging technologies.
Yeah, we're clearly building the plane as we're flying it.
Yep.
And it's going to take a while for the laws to catch up. I heard an interesting comparison recently to the laws that we now are very familiar with driving and talking on your phone, or driving and looking at email. Well, when cell phones first came out, those kind of protections, though now we consider obvious, weren't there. I think we're in that space now with all of the data and the tools that we're using to maximize the benefits of that data. We're going to continue to see regulation in that space to kind of give us that guidance and those tools of protection.
Yeah, and Jed, you make a good point here in your notes that just because you can collect data doesn't necessarily mean you should. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is in this race to adopt AI technologies, right? In this race to collect data on your customers and gain insights from it, you have to have, I think, a full spectrum approach to what are the risks of that. So it's the right tool for the right job. AI may solve for and make more efficient your business in a lot of respects, but you have to think about the risks. Are you putting out a tool that's going to interface with members of the public and consumers? That raises the stakes that you could have a regulatory issue or some potential risk to safety. Are minors going to be using your tool? Because then that raises the stakes on your ability to detect anomalies and abuse. And so when it comes to AI, there's a whole array of harms that potentially could arise. Harms to individuals, harms to the organization, harms to the environment and the ecosystem, like national security. So I think where you apply AI or where you don't deploy AI is as important as where you do, because you can avoid wholesale some of those risks.
See, and that's an interesting point, because Sarah, in financial services, which of course Nasdaq is a part of, we are restricted from using certain chat and communication channels, right?
Right.
So not specific to here, but just for enterprises in general, if you are running a generative AI application, what if, it might not even be intentional, but what if you put in a piece of sensitive data that you weren't aware that it was coded as sensitive? That changes the calculus, no matter how much data governance and training you have with the workforce.
That's right, and that's why it's really important to be familiar with the terms and conditions that are in place for the tool that you're putting it into, first of all. Are you sharing it and they've promised not to give it to others or use it for themselves? Or are there really no protections in place for the information that you've put in? Just like with any other way that you share confidential or trade secret information or privileged information, for example, the more you give it to others, potentially the more you're eroding the protections that are in place under the law for that. So it's not so simple as I put something that's confidential to my business into the business provided AI tool. It's really important, again, for leadership and legal to be aware of the tools that are being used, the contractual protections in place, and put in policies and procedures for employees and others to make sure that they are utilizing those tools in a way that's protective of the company.
So,
Can I add one point
of course, yeah.
to that? And the flip side of this problem is you can have all this governance, you can have a policy, but if you don't have some enforcement, if you don't back it up, people will always find a way to use shadow IT, just as we saw in the example that you mentioned, right? Work may not provide these apps, but people are going to find them, and really, like at that point, people are helping themselves to these free applications that don't have the same contractual and security settings, right, that an enterprise-approved version would. So if a company is saying, well, we're just not going to do it, and we'll be done with the problem, they're not done with the problem, because there's a high likelihood that people are just going to use these in an unapproved way, and that does create more of a risk that your sensitive data will find its way to a place it shouldn't.
Well,
Right, eyes wide open. I always advise you can enjoy the benefits, but you have to have careful management that goes with it.
And the whole thing is, I mean, especially as a publicly traded company, and depending on what industry you're in, healthcare, I mean, highly regulated when it comes to privacy. Financial services, we're one of the more highly regulated industries. There really is no way to get around that. It's part of our reporting requirements. You can't just be like, all right, well, you know, it'll go under the table. It doesn't work that way. You could see you have one vulnerability, it could be a domino effect.
Right, and I wouldn't say that it's just limited to highly regulated
Right.
industries. There are information sharing guidelines at the state level that really apply to all businesses, any business that has a website, essentially. So really being thoughtful about how you're collecting information and really how you're disclosing those practices to consumers, to employees, being upfront and transparent, that's going to go a long way in compliance.
Yeah, and Judd, in the last couple of minutes here, when you think about regulation formulation in 2025, let's even call it, you know, the next year or two, is it feasible? Do you think we will get there and have some sort of a framework? I can't see how we wouldn't, right?
I think there is a high degree of probability that we're going to see new regulation because we have 50 sovereigns, right, 50 states, right? And so regardless of what the federal agenda is going to be, regardless of what control of Congress looks like and the agenda in Congress, you can rest assured that the states are going to move forward across these fronts on cyber, privacy, and AI.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, Sarah, I mean, GDPR is a perfect example. If you want to operate in a global capacity, you need to adhere to it. And we've seen other global jurisdictions create these frameworks.
They seem more able to do that than I think our current.
Well, I mean, our legislation formulation takes on a whole different process. Right?
Absolutely. But I agree with Judd. At state level, I can guarantee we're going to continue to see regulation at the AI level, at the healthcare or child privacy or other levels. And remains to be seen what it continues from the Biden administration with the Trump administration as far as some of the executive orders in place, information protections, especially critical infrastructure, and other tools that we're now accustomed to seeing, whether or not they continue the progression that they're on.
Regulation at the end of the day, or an operational framework, it's good. It fosters innovation. You know in what capacity you're able to operate in a compliant way.
And that's exactly what our clients are hungry for. They're ready to comply, they want to avoid this patchwork. They'd like to have something uniform. I don't think that their expectations are going to be met anytime soon.
Right.
Given
Hopes, yes.
Well, look, the one thing, if you want to bench Trump 2.0 to 1.0, benching, you know, against the market economy and global leadership is important to his administration. So
as there continues to be a business cry out for guidance, I think we're going to continue to see more and more effort in that regard.
All right, and we'll leave it on a positive note. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.